You can afford to overpay a bit for a really fine business, depending on your degree of certainty that it's a really fine business and is going to stay one for a long, long time. And you can't make that decision about most businesses. I mean, it's just not given to man to be able to foresee 20 years out on most businesses. On the other hand, if you pay big prices for something, you're counting on earnings. You're counting on being right a very high percentage of the time on projections of earnings that go up. And of course, the best kind of earnings are the ones that go up without more capital investment. Very easy to have great earnings in the utility business. You just put a slug of money in and you get a return out of it. The return isn't that great. So you're really looking for something that will grow. And I did mention one thing at the meeting, which I don't think people appreciate at all, is if you take, say, the 5 largest businesses in the country by market value, you're probably, and assuming Berkshire isn't in there, it flips in and flips out. Let's assume we're out. Those 5 businesses have a market value of $2.5 trillion or more, starting with Apple. You could run those 5 businesses with no equity capital. So you have close to 10% of the market value, perhaps, of the United States in 5 extremely good businesses that essentially take no capital. Now, that was not the case in the past. I mean, if you were at the turn of the century and you were talking about U.S. Steel and the big railroads and all that, you made large sums, or Rockefeller with the oil business, by earning money with refineries or steel mills, and finally you earned enough so that you bought another one, and you borrowed some money along the way, but you had to build up equity capital dramatically as you went along. And even if you go back to the Fortune 500 of 30 years ago, the companies that were big took big capital. Now you've got the 5 highest valued companies in the country. They don't take any capital. Even IBM has net no tangible assets. And if you take the equity, gap equity, subtract the intangible assets, it's less than zero. And if you take businesses, you take a Google. I mean, they may invest some money in fixed assets and all, but they actually need no equity capital. So you could have a $2.5 trillion business in the United States and not need equity capital. And that is a different world than the past.
You, over the years, over the last 10 or 15 years, have become a much more industrialized companies, things like the railroads that do require more capital equipment, more capital investment. When did you notice that the top 5 market cap companies required no capital investment? When did you make this realization, and does that explain your investment in Apple?
It doesn't explain it. I've understood that for a long time, but it's become more and more concentrated. It used to be ExxonMobil up there, and so the shift has been taking place, and essentially, the great businesses have become businesses that don't take capital. And that really wasn't true. I mean, the auto industry took a lot of capital. The aerospace industry took a lot of capital. The railroad industry. These are huge industries that affected America. I mean, they changed our country. Now you've got companies that have huge market values changing the country. They don't take any money. Those are the wonderful businesses. The businesses that grow and don't require money. And, of course, that's why they're awash in cash. And to the extent they made it abroad, some of it they'd have to pay some tax if they brought it back. Now, they use some capital. I mean, they build headquarters, and they have small amounts of inventory in some cases.
Research and development for some of these issues.
But if you don't need it. Absolutely. I could run those businesses, and they could run them a lot better with absolutely no equity capital. In fact, a huge negative equity capital. You can't run ExxonMobil with negative capital. You can't run U.S. Steel. You can't run the railroads. You can't run the utilities. All these massive industries. Really what the country was built on up till not that many years ago. And now there's this huge shift to intangibles. And they produce products that people love. So I'm not saying this is in any way frivolous or anything of the sort that it happened this way. But it makes a big difference when people talk about capital shortages and how we need bring the money back. Because there's a whole bunch of things that are sort of built on this conception of how business was 50 years ago. And sometimes it's useful for the people in those businesses to sort of play up that fact and not what really has happened in the way of change. But it is a big change.
You're talking also about the shift away from an industrial economy, away from more towards services, more towards blue-collar or white-collar jobs in many of these instances, too.
And if you can find businesses that don't take capital and are going to earn a lot of money, that's how you can become rich very easily.